2 years ago, after observing many months, if not more than a year, of slightly elevated earthquake activity and inflation of the volcano, steady inflation of the summit area of the volcano, we decided that the volcano had departed from what we call its background quiet state. It was entering a period of restlessness where these two volcano monitoring parameters, deformation and seismicity, were out of background, above the baseline. And so the elevation of the alert level from normal to advisory and the aviation color code from green to yellow just recognized that fact, that the volcano was restless.
But it did not mean that Mauna Loa was on the verge of erupting.
No, it did not. And we were trying to be very clear that there was no imminent eruption. It just meant that the volcano was awakening, it was restless, and the interpretation of these monitoring data then and now is that they reflect the accumulation of molten material, or magma, in the shallow reservoir system of the volcano. So indeed, it is accumulating material that could very well be on its way to erupting at some point.
Okay, so today, 2 years after you first raised the threat level, have you seen a change in seismicity and deformation at Mauna Loa that would cause you concern?
We have seen these two parameters wax and wane through time. So there have been periods where the rate of deformation and the rate of seismicity have been higher, and then periods where it's been lower. But overall, we're still at an elevated level for both. So I guess what I would answer it shortly is by saying it just continues rather steadily.
So we are not on the verge of a Mauna Loa eruption?
No, an eruption is still not imminent. The key for us now is, of course, to try to understand what will be the signals that put us in the next alert level bin when we might raise the alert level from advisory to watch. And based on the last two eruptions that we observed and monitored with earlier networks, we expect to see an increase in the rate of earthquake activity well above what we see now, weeks and perhaps even as many as months prior to an eruption. So we're still not in that phase where we're concerned about an imminent eruption.
You are doing some outreach now at the 2-year anniversary. Tell us about the outreach. First of all, why are you doing it if you're really not concerned?
Good question. The 2-year anniversary is kind of a convenient timestamp for us to reflect on where HVO is in its preparedness. So we're actually continuing to do some internal dialogue about our own eruption readiness. Do we have all our equipment in place? Are people ready to do what we need to do? What sorts of science questions are we going to want to answer in the next eruption? So those kinds of conversations are going on internally. We are also, this summer, late summer, putting in some additional monitoring equipment on Mauna Loa as we've found resources to do so. We'll be installing another gas sensor high on the southwest rift zone of Mauna Loa, an additional seismometer to track earthquake activity high on the east flank of Mauna Loa. So we're beefing up our ability to track activity and hopefully issue a more timely forecast. In addition, we're renewing our connections with agency partners such as the National Park Service and Hawaii County Civil Defense, who will be key players in responding to an eruption, and we'll have a series of planning discussions with them later this fall.
You mentioned you're adding a seismometer and a tilt meter?
A gas sensor.
A gas sensor. So what do you have there now on Mauna Loa to let you know what's going on?
We already have several dozen seismometers and GPS instruments scattered around the volcano. So it is a fairly well-monitored volcano. But we always have gaps, and we're trying to fill in those holes as we can with additional instrumentation to improve our ability to precisely locate earthquakes and rapidly detect that deformation. The addition of a second real-time gas sensor will hopefully allow us to see an increase in output of either carbon dioxide or more likely sulfur dioxide, and an increase in temperature prior to an eruption.
When was the last time Mauna Loa had a major eruption?
Mauna Loa last erupted in 1984 in late March. At that time, the eruption began up in the summit caldera, briefly spurted into the upper southwest drift zone, and then localized down into the northeast drift zone, where lava headed towards Hilo.
And how long did that eruption last?
That eruption lasted for about 3 weeks, and lava came within about 4 miles of the outskirts of town, Kaumana part of Hilo town, before it stopped.
How much notice do you expect the citizenry might get if an eruption of Mauna Loa becomes, you feel, imminent?
Well, that's, of course, the very important question. And if it follows the script of 1975 and 1984, we would expect to see weeks, if not months, of even higher elevated earthquake activity. And then in the hours preceding the actual outbreak, we should start to see what's called volcanic tremor, which is essentially constant ground vibration as magma is making its final way towards the surface. So in that scenario, we hope to have at least weeks of an early warning and then maybe only a few hours of the final warning.
I know that the job of Hawaiian Volcano Observatory is to present the science, present the data, and it's actually not your job to tell people exactly what to do. But do you have a sense as to what civil defense might tell people to do? Should we be, as you say, perhaps weeks away or months away?
I don't know exactly what they will say, but I know they're thinking about it, and that will be a topic of discussion at some of these planning meetings coming up. We're in a fortunate position that the current civil defense chief here on the Big Island is the former chief ranger of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, so he's very familiar with eruption response, and I know that they'll put a good plan in place.
What kind of outreach are you going to do to the community as part of the 2-year anniversary?
Right. So next week, during the week of this 2-year anniversary, we'll put out a Volcano Watch essay in the weekly newspaper and email release that reminds people that Mauna Loa is restless. And like HVO, everyone on the island should think about being prepared for an eruption. And what that would mean to me is looking at where you are on the map relative to Mauna Loa, thinking about what you would do should there be news of an eruption impending or about to happen, and then putting a family plan together. So beyond the Volcano Watch, we will be having these meetings, as I mentioned, with interagency partners, and then we hope in the early part of the new year to actually have a series of community meetings, particularly in Ka'u and South Kona, areas that are closest to the Southwest Rift Zone, and those communities might have a little less lead time than, say, the Hilo region.
You said in 1984 the lava went towards Hilo, towards the Mauna area. Why do you believe that South Kona and Ka'u are perhaps more likely to get the eruption lava this time?
Actually, I wouldn't say that that's a certainty that they are more likely to receive an eruption. There's no evidence at this time that the eruption is more likely from the Southwest Rift Zone. But we don't know which rift zone it will eventually erupt into, even if it will go into a rift zone. The historical eruptions of Mauna Loa almost always start in the summit region, above about 12,000 feet, and then about half of them stay there. Another quarter of them go down the northeast rift zone, another quarter down the southwest rift zone. So there's just not an absolute pattern here that we can predict with certainty.
Which one goes to Ka'u and South Kona, the south?
The southwest rift zone would be the area of eruption that would threaten Ka'u and South Kona.
How many eruptions have there been from Mauna Loa that you know of?
Since 1832, there have been 33 eruptions.
Is it a certainty that Mauna Loa will erupt again?
I would say it is a certainty. The volcano is still an active, growing volcano, and with that rate of eruptive activity in the last couple hundred years, there's no reason to suspect that she's done. One of the main messages I wanted to get out today was that emphasizing an eruption is not imminent, but that it is prudent, just as it is in hurricane season, for everyone to think about their preparedness and emergency response plan. I would say it's also prudent for people potentially affected by a Mauna Loa eruption to think about what they would do in the event an alert went out that an eruption was imminent.
But again, we'll have weeks.
We should have weeks of warning.
How long might a potential eruption take to reach, let's say, the coast of the Big Island?
Well, that will depend, of course, on where it is erupting from, what part of the rift zone or the summit. But we know from historical activity that eruptions along the southwest rift zone can produce lava flows that move quickly down the west flank of the volcano to the ocean in as little as 3 or 4 hours.
Hualalai?
There is no evidence right now that Hualalai is waking up or active. In fact, we just put out our monthly volcano statement about Hualalai, Mauna Kea, and Haleakala, and all are quiet.